I might get a sunburn from this. So yeah, just out of curiosity, how many of you were here for my tutorial last year on Kivy? Looked like a pretty good number. Yeah, okay. I'm Ben Rousch. I am the entire IT department for a small company. I play with Kivy on the side just because it's fun. I love Python, and I like Android, and that's what really got me into it. So today I am going to talk specifically about Kivy's mobile stack, because that's what most people are interested in. When they come to Kivy, a lot of people just assume it's only for mobile, but it's not. You can run it on Windows, Linux, OS X, Android, and iOS. But most people are interested in the mobile aspect because they want to write Python and they want to run it on their mobile phones. And that's really hard to do. But I wanted to do it in a unique way. So I actually created an app. This presentation is a Kivy app. And I created it using many of Kivy's features. So as I'm giving the talk talking about the mobile stack of Kivy, I will be showing many features of Kivy, sort of a lot of the default features. You can see animations going on here. It's very easy to do. So let's get started. What is Kivy? Kivy is MIT licensed. It lets you write your Python code and run it cross-platform. It's designed especially for touch interfaces. It doesn't have to be touch interfaces, but it works a lot better with those. Sort of assumes that you're using a touch interface. Multi-touch even. So it runs on Windows, the current versions, OS X 10.7 and above, Linux, as long as you have decent OpenGL drivers, Android 2.3 and above, and iOS. I'm not real familiar with iOS versions, but the current one it should work on. A little more about what is Kivy. Oh. Okay, we have a sound issue. All right, well, we're missing sound. I'm not sure how to handle that. Anyways, this is Guido van Rossum, our benevolent dictator for life, talking about Kivy at PyCon. He mentioned us in the keynote. Everything he said is not quite accurate, but most of it was. That's all right, we'll skip it for now. The app is online, so if you want to watch it later, you can. So what is Kivy? This is a sort of minimal app, Kivy app. I'm going to have to point up here because I can't show on the screen, but you've got a few imports that KV equals. That's called a Kivy text. It's sort of our own GUI design language. And you load it, and you have a app down below, and your root widget, and that's about all you need. That one will actually just show a button with nothing on it, so it's very exciting. If you want to learn more about how to use Kivy, how to write Kivy programs, I recommend my PyOhio talk last year, and at the end of this I have several other resources for you to get started. And this is actually an example of the Kivy language, which you can write in your own files, .kv files. This is the Kivy code for this slide that you're viewing right now. So it has a root widget for this slide, which is a screen. The screen manager is what turns it into slides. And then got the title at the top, which says what is Kivy. Then we have the accordion, which is these little things going back and forth. The code input is what shows the code in highlighted for that language. So we actually have a Kivy highlighter, a Lexer. So this is actually showing the Kivy for this slide on the device. So let's move on from that. When you come to Kivy, you may be overwhelmed at first by all the different projects we have. Like you may land on the web page, which mostly just talks about Kivy. You may land on the GitHub, which has several Kivy projects and sister projects or related projects. And these are all the ones related to mobile, and these are what I'm going to talk about today. So we already talked about Kivy. Next we're going to talk about how to compile your Kivy app. Assuming you've written your Kivy app, say on a desktop, how to compile that for Android. So let's go there. Very simply, Python for Android, or as you'll see it sometimes, Py4a, is a command line tool. It currently only works on Linux. Sometimes it works on OS X until Apple breaks it for compiling your Python code into Android. I don't know if you've ever used it, but it has quite a lot of installation steps, right? You got to install your compiler and a bunch of dependencies. If you're on a 64-bit OS, you need to install certain 32-bit libs. This trips up a lot of people. It's a very common problem. You can pick it out in the IRC or the Kivy users channel very easily. Then you have to actually install the regular Android tools and the Android SDK that you want to use, as well as the Android NDK. Now you have to install all these yourself. And once you've installed Apache Ant, hey, you're good to go. Then you have to do the configuration of Python for Android, which is a bunch of environment variables. Doesn't sound too hard, but they have to be exactly right or it will not work. You need your SDK path, you need the NDK path, you need the NDK version that you're using, you need the Android API version that you're using, and you need to modify your path. I don't know if you can see at the bottom there, but we've got a little progress bar going. It's not quite as obvious. After your configuration, the first step is to create a distribution. And what this does is compiles Python interpreter and Kivy and any third-party modules that you've specified into a little bundle. It compiles it for Android. And then, yep, that's what it says. So here's the command at the bottom to do that with a few third-party modules, request pigments, that sort of thing. All you really need on a basic one is just Kivy. You don't need the other ones. Let's talk a bit about third-party modules. Pure Python modules that are on PyPy are very easy to use. You just specify them on that line. It goes to PyPy, brings them down, and includes them. If those modules need C extensions, then you need what's called a Python for Android recipe. And this is basically a modification of the setup.py that tells it how to compile for Android. Sometimes that's easy, sometimes that's not easy. It depends on the assumptions made by that module developer. We have, I think, probably 30 recipes for common modules right now. And sometimes, I'd say we get a new one every few months that someone contributes because they need a new module with C extensions. So the next step after you've created your distribution is to create your APK. You run this build.py command. Now, yeah, usually you do this in a make file or something to automate it more. But you can see various parts of it are, you specify your package name, the name of your application, the version, which has to be in a certain numeric format. You tell it where your code is, the orientation, which can be center, landscape, or portrait, the permissions, the Android permissions that your app will need, get specified next, things to ignore if you have files in there that you don't want it to include. Sometimes people get tripped up and they will run this and generate an APK, and then they won't ignore things, and then that APK will get stuffed inside the next APK, and then it'll run again, and then that double big APK gets stuffed. And your apps get big real fast if you don't ignore the right things. You can specify the icon, which is a PNG, and a pre-splash screen, which is usually a JPEG or PNG, the SDK version, the minimum SDK version, and some other metadata that you only need when you're doing specific things. And then finally at the end you can do debug or release, whether you're creating a package for debugging for just testing or for releasing to Google Play. But that is quite the command, you must admit, and it's easy to get wrong. So there are a few problems with Python for Android that you probably noticed. The installation is tedious. The configuration is very picky. You need multiple steps. Create the distribution, create the build.py, and the long, finicky command line arguments. Make me sad. So let's go back here, and next we will talk about Kivy iOS. which is basically the iOS version of Python for Android. It lets you compile your Kivy program for iOS. I'm not very familiar with it, so I'm not going to talk about it very much. I am going to show, these are screenshots from the Apple App Store of Kivy apps that are currently in that App Store. This is 2048. One thing to notice with these is you can see how different they are from the stock Kivy theme, which is, my app is basically a stock theme, the button colors and the backgrounds and that sort of thing. So you can see how different you can make Kivy apps look. This is a game, Angry Blocks, I think it's called. Number Lane is another game. Process Craft was one of the first Kivy apps on iOS. It's a very complicated program that costs a lot of money, so I haven't actually used it. And another little quiz game, Quizzin' I think it's called. So you can see you can make it look quite different depending on your design skills, really. Mine are not that great, so my Kivy apps look pretty stock. So we talked about Python for Android and Kivy iOS. Now it would be nice to simplify those things. And we have done that with a project called Bulldozer. If you're coming to Kivy and you haven't done anything, for Android, you will want to start with Bulldozer, not with Python for Android, because it is that much easier. Let's compare some features of Bulldozer. What does Bulldozer do first? It does the things that Python for Android does. It will do the things that Kivy iOS does, and it sometimes works, again, unless Apple breaks it, which is frequently. But to compare how you do something in Py4a, the prereqs are roughly the same. You clone Python for Android. With Bulldozer, you can install it properly via pip. Or easy install. For Py4a, you've got to do the Android tools, the SDK, the NDK, and Ant all manually, which I don't know if you've ever tried to get those right, but it is a lot of long downloads, pretty tedious. On Bulldozer, it does all those for you the first time it runs. And in Py4a, you have a bunch of environment variables that you have to set. In Bulldozer, well, environment variables and that build command, you have one single spec file using Bulldozer. Much easier to use and to get your settings right. It is really nice. I use Bulldozer all the time, so much that I have forgotten how to do things in Python for Android because I don't ever want to go back and use it manually. But we get people coming new into Kivy, and of course they're going to Python for Android because that's what they've seen, for the last year, 2 years, as how to do things. And so it's the first thing we do is say, try Bulldozer, see if it works then. Yeah.
Is Bulldozer a part of the Kivy distribution?
No, it is on GitHub. You pip install it as a separate package. He asked if it was part of the Kivy distribution. It is not, though it may be in the future. So then if we compare the process for actually building an APK, Py4a, we have that distribute set, but Bulldozer does that for you automatically. You don't have to worry about it. You've got the packaging command here, the big build command. In Kivy, that is reduced to Bulldozer Android debug. Very simple. In Py4a, you have to use the Android tool. So if you actually want to put that APK onto your device, which you have plugged in, you have to go via ADB and use their commands. Bulldozer understands ADB and can use those commands. So you just add install to the end of your Bulldozer command. And then if you want to run that APK on your device, install and run are two separate things. Again, you have to use ADB in Py4a. Bulldozer understands how to do that. You just add run on the end. So you can see it's much simpler to get things done. You basically, if you've got your code, you want to compile it and run it on your device or an emulator, Bulldozer Android debug install run. Well, you do have to twiddle your fingers because it does take a while still, but it's much simpler. And Bulldozer has some alternative deployment methods, such as serve, which I actually use all the time because I will code on one machine and then I will use Git clone on a remote server, a Linux server, which has Bulldozer on it, and I use that to run, compile, and serve. So I do Bulldozer, Android debug serve, and then that opens using the built-in web server in Python. I can then go to that website, download it on my device, and run it. So it's an alternative to plugging in if you don't like to do it that way. The future of Bulldozer. iOS packaging support, which is sometimes there, sometimes not. We had a Google Summer of Code student who was working on this. Oh, that's interesting. That wasn't supposed to pop up. Somehow Google thought I was talking to. I said Google, and it. We had a Google Summer of Code student working on it. Didn't work out too well, but we are still working on adding Windows packaging, OS X packaging, and Linux packaging support into Bulldozer. So you'll be able to, from one command, make your Windows program, your OS X program, or your Linux deb or RPM right from Bulldozer, as easy as it is to make an Android APK right now. So let's go back to our little menu. Let's see, next we are going to talk about PyGenius. So you've created your cool Kivy app using Kivy libraries and Python third-party modules, but now you want to interact with device APIs, which are provided via Java. Your accelerometer, your GPS, all that sort of thing. PyGenius is the program that lets you do that. It's a Python wrapper around Java classes that it lets you interact with them in a Pythonic way. Here I have 3 examples. This presentation is actually on an Android tablet, so I have 3 little gadgets here interacting with the Python API, or the Java API. Got the battery status. I am unplugged right now. Can zoom in on that a little bit. This is called a scatter. It lets you zoom and move and rotate widgets around. Got the accelerometer going here. So if I move this around a little bit, you can see the numbers go even crazier. And then we've got, say, the text-to-speech. Move that up a little. Let's do... Oh wait, I learned this last night. I have to put a space in here to cheat a little bit. Otherwise it doesn't say it right. Oh, and you won't hear it because the sound isn't working. Anyways, it says hello, Pi Ohio, believe me. I don't even hear it. It must be going through the HDMI out to something else. So yes, PyGenius is the module that lets you do that. When you create a program with Python for Android or with Bulldozer, PyGenius is automatically included. You don't have to do anything special to include it. So we'll go back here and PyObjects. No, don't go behind there. Go hide. Come out and play. PyObjects is a similar thing for ObjectiveC, so for your iOS apps. It is a Python wrapper for your ObjectiveC. Again, I'm not real familiar with it. This is a short example of, I believe, creating an alert using that. So creating a native iOS alert with Python. You can see it's a little difficult here because all you're doing is creating alerts. Seems like a lot of code. PyGenius is the same way. It takes a lot of code to get anything done with the native Android API. And so some people get frustrated by that, so we have created a project called Plier. And what Plier does is it abstracts those APIs away so you can use them more easily from Python. Right now we have accelerometer, camera, GPS, notifications, text-to-speech, open the email program, use the vibrator, send SMS messages, compass, get a unique device ID, use a gyroscope, and the battery status. These are all available for the Android API. We are also, Plier isn't just for mobile though. It also abstracts these APIs away on desktop, so Windows, OS X, and Linux. And the support for these various APIs sort of depends on If somebody needs it on a certain platform, then we help them create that implementation for that platform. If you go to the Plier website, you can get an idea of what's available on which platform. But what I'd like to compare is the code required to do various things in PyGenius versus how you do it in Plier. So this is just getting the battery status, right? That charging in percent. This is the PyGenius code you need. So you can see it gets kind of Java-like, right? Because you've got to wrap all these Java classes, and they love to be very wordy. Compared to Plier, which is where we abstract it away into essentially one command. Accelerometer is similar. You just have tons of code which we abstract away with Plier. Now, Plier underneath actually uses this code. This is sort of copy and pasted from the Plier project for the Android platform. But we try to take care of all that stuff and give you an easy interface. For instance, the battery status one has support for pretty much every platform. And so there's a similar bunch of Windows code for that. It's not quite as much as the Android, but it's close. And then for text-to-speech, isn't quite as bad, but it's still a lot easier to do in Plier. What time is it? So that looks good. So we've talked about all these different projects. You can see sort of how they're related. I hope that helps you when you come to Kivy to figure out what you need to look at, because it can be overwhelming. Because there's these, and then there's even more projects that are in the Kivy ecosystem. I'll talk about a few of them. I don't really have slides ready for them, but one is called the Kivy Garden. And what that is extra widgets for Kivy. So Kivy has quite a set of widgets. I've demonstrated a lot of them here, maybe half, probably not half of them in this talk. Kivy Garden is for more advanced widgets, like a date time picker, right? Who's ever found a good date time picker widget? Nobody. They don't exist. But everyone has an opinion on, oh, this one's better than this one, it's better than this one. So instead of picking one for Kivy, we let people create what we call garden flowers. And they can create their own date time picker, just include it. And if someone wants to use it, they can just include that widget. It's pretty easy to include in your project. Trying to think of what some of the other ones are, but I can't think off the top of my head. But it's things like that. I think there's some graphics stuff in there too, some advanced graphics. Another part of the Kivy ecosystem is, the Kivy Designer. Yeah, I'll bring that slide up even though there's nothing on it, because what this is, we have a lot of people asking for a designer for KV files, for the GUI files, sort of like Glade has a designer, Qt has designers, right? A GUI designer to design your interface. We sort of have that with the Kivy Designer. It's not in a very good state. It's kind of usable, but not very. And I think the problem is there's not a lot of interest in it from the core developers. So, the more you get into Kivy, the more comfortable you are just editing the KV language files, which aren't very complicated. And so you sort of don't need this GUI designer, which a lot of people coming in, I guess they expect that. They've used it in other GUI frameworks. If you're interested in that, we do accept any help that you want to give creating the designer. Somebody mentioned to me earlier, and I didn't include it in my slides, on Android there's a program called QPython, which Kivy is not actually a part of or related to QPython, but they have an IDE on Android, which is kind of cool. The Kivy version's a little bit old, which is frustrating. But you can check that out too if you want to edit right on Android. Let me bring up my information slide here. So if you want more information about Kivy, these are places to go. Let's see, especially this presentation. You can go out to my GitHub page, and I have all of the code for this presentation on that page in the current state, and there's a link at the bottom which you can click, which will download an APK of this. So if you have Kivy installed on Linux, Windows, OS 10, you can just download this code and run it using Kivy. If you're using Android, you can grab it there, and I may even put it in the Google Play App Store.
Excuse me. Would you mind going back to that page that listed all the resources?
Yep, I'm going back there right now.
Because I'm going to take a snapshot.
And then, obviously, kivy.org, that's our webpage. The various projects are on GitHub, all the ones we talked about and a few more. The Kivy Garden, I have a link to that. And then down here at the bottom is, there are some tutorials on the Kivy webpage in the docs, but I really recommend you start with the Kivy Crash Course series of videos by one of our core committers. It's an excellent, I think it's 12 or 16 videos, each about 10 minutes long, that talks about one aspect of Kivy, and they start from, here's a basic app, here's some things you can do with it, and then, in the next one he moves on to other widgets. It's a really great way to get started with Kivy. I'll bring that up real quick, maybe. Oh, I did something there. That is the presentation. I do have, how much time do we have left, do you know?
You have plenty.
Lots of time? More than I want?
Yeah.
Half an hour, almost.
You have 17 minutes.
Okay, that's plenty of time. I will take questions first, and if we have a little time after that, I'll show a couple of apps that were created on Kivy. We recently had a contest, not a game contest. The first one was a game creation contest. This one was an educational app contest. I think we had about 50 submissions that were runnable and valid, and we sorted through those and picked some winners, and I have a few of those on here that I can show you. That was a lot of work, but it was pretty fun too. So any questions? Yes?
A lot of those projects you were talking about, they're on GitHub as well?
Yes, they're all on GitHub.
And the build.py, is that a standard file that's included in the Kivy distribution that you build everything with?
No, if you want to use Python for Android and build.py, you have to clone it from the Git repository and run it that way. But I recommend you just go straight to Bulldozer and don't even worry about that, because it downloads Python for Android for you also. You don't ever have to deal with build.py.
That's what I'm clear.
Any other questions? Yeah?
Could you speak to performance on the devices, knowing they're small, kind of resource scarce at times? And then could you also speak to stability? So I own a development shop. If we had customers interested in mobile apps, I mean, is it at a place where you can build some legitimate stuff, or are you going to get 80% complete and realize you've got things that you need a Kivy developer to fix, and it's 3 months before that happens?
Those are good questions. The first one was, can I speak to performance? I have not found any performance problems. Others do. There are two places you really have to watch out for, especially on Android. One is not running long-running processes on your main thread, right, on the GUI thread. So if you have things, if you're going out to a website and fetching something and bring it back, you would use a clock. Kivy has built-in things to put these on different threads to break them up, to schedule them. What I'm showing here is the Kivy launcher, which is not really what I wanted, which is a way to run your Kivy apps on Android and edit them right on Android. But I was just going to show some clock code, which I have in the main.py here. So I'm opening my Python files for this talk right on the device here. And you can see this is the title screen animation, which is the text going off to the right and then coming in. I use a clock here to schedule those animations. That's the same sort of thing that you would use to schedule long-running tasks or tasks that may be delayed, that sort of thing. That's the first performance thing you need to watch out for. The second is some of the widgets are not as efficient as they could be. People especially find the list view I believe it's called, where you can put sort of any widget in a list, and you could build widgets and widgets, and people do huge lists of these multi-widget things, and it gets slow. There's been a lot of talk about speeding that up. But in general, performance is not a problem. On older devices, it can be a problem. We support Android 2.3, but if you're doing something complicated on Android 2.3, it's going to be slow, and it's going to take up a lot of space. Your minimum Kivy APK is going to be about 6 megabytes. But then building from there is just your resources that you put into it and your third-party modules. You know, your photos, your videos. I think this is 11 or 12 megs, and it's got a video in it and a bunch of photos. So that's for size. Loading isn't too bad anymore. On old devices, it can take a while to load a Kivy app because it actually starts up that whole Python interpreter and then goes into your code. What was the second part? Oh, stability? Or
Yeah, just like,
support sounds more like.
for customers in particular, thinking about, you know, so I'm not just playing with it, is it at a state where you can use this kind of in production quality, or do you have to have a customer that's kind of like, yeah, let's give it a try?
You know, we don't really run into that. We have some of the Kivy developers are self-employed or contractors, and they use Kivy in their job, and they are comfortable doing that. What you run into more than say is Kivy ready is customers want an app that looks native, right? Native to that platform. Kivy looks the same on every platform. It looks like a Kivy app. Now you can theme it, you can change the colors, you can do all kinds of stuff. But if you want it to look native on more than one platform, you have to do that yourself. You have to make those widgets to look native, whatever that means. So that's what we run into more than is Kivy ready for production. We do have several people who use it in production. The Process Craft app I mentioned, that's a really big one that's in use. We have some people, we have one guy using it on old Android, like Android 2.2 even, for some sort of control for a machine. I forget which machine, but he's using it there. Yeah, so it is ready for production. And you also asked about whether everything is there. Now, what you run into, say, accessing the Android API, is you'll want to spell out beforehand which Android APIs you need to use. And if they aren't already in Plier, so if they aren't easy to access yet, you'll want to experiment and see if you can get that working. It can sometimes be frustrating unless you're familiar already with Android development, because you end up going to the Android documentation for that API, trying to figure out what you need to wrap to get done, and then how to do it. After you've done it a few times, it's not too bad, but it can be frustrating. So yeah, if I would make sure beforehand you understand what Kivy can do on its own, and what you'll need native APIs for. And if it's all there, then you're good to go. Yeah, back in the corner.
When I downloaded your 2014 it looks all smushed together.
That's a good point. He says the app, this presentation, looks very smushed on his phone. I sort of optimized this presentation I'm running this on a Nexus 10 tablet because I knew I wanted to present from the tablet. So I have not made any considerations for a phone UI. But what it does have in it is, which you can probably get it to fit a lot better, down here at the bottom of the code is these font sizes. So if you shrink that font size regular down to, say, like 12 points or something, SP12, it may look a lot better on your phone. But creating this, I didn't take any phone use into consideration. Yeah.
In that vein, do you have any access to the sort of resource framework in Android to let it customize for size of screen, whether or not it's horizontal or vertical, that sort of thing?
You don't, with Kivy, you don't use the Android framework to do that because your app runs on all these different platforms. What you do is you can design you take into account in your design, this is the app I created last year. Let's see. This is the Say This app. All it does is speak what's in there. It's got a little slider for the font. And you can see the sliders on the left in landscape. If I rotate this, right, it moves to the top. So you sort of code those different orientations, different screen sizes into your Kivy app. And what you can do is load a different KV file based on, say, the number of pixels you have available, based on the orientation, that sort of thing. But you have to make that yourself. There's nothing built in to handle that stuff. Yep. And as for some of the Android native widgets, there are a couple of things to embed, say, the Android web browser into it, but the native Android web browser, that doesn't get embedded though. It sits either in front of or behind your app. It's really strange. Yeah.
Like for some Apple apps, they need to use their own language to write the apps, like C object. So with the Kivy, do we need to still purchase those language, or we can just go buy them? We still need to wiggle with those languages to make it happen.
Well, so you're saying normally an iOS app you use ObjectiveC to create that app. Kivy compiles to native code, so it does not use ObjectiveC. However, if you want to access certain parts of the iOS API, the gyroscope, these sort of device-specific things, you have to create that ObjectiveC wrapper using PyObjects. That's how you would do that. Let's go over here.
Could you please elaborate a little bit in terms of the process of the whole project, so from conceptualizing some of the problems you might have run into to finished and continuing developing the product?
Okay. Well, it sort of depends on what you want your endpoint to be. I mean, do you want an Android APK? Is that all you care about? Or do you want something cross-platform, right? You want it to run on, say, Windows and OS X and Android or something like that. If you're just going for Android, you mostly what you would do is on whatever your desktop you have, you design your app and you use things like the Plier API to abstract away device-specific things. So, like say the battery status or text-to-speech. That's different on each platform. So if you can abstract that away, you can create your whole app on the desktop and then just send it over to test the device-specific parts. And that's typically how I do it. My goal for this was to create the whole app on Android. I did not succeed in that. I did most of it on the desktop. Just because the editing on Android is hard, even with a decent-sized screen. There's the copy and paste with the touch is so painful. And there's no proper IDE. So yeah, you create most of it on your desktop to test device-specific things. You send it over to Android, iOS, whatever you need. Come back, fix it, send it again. That's pretty much the development cycle that I use. Yeah.
When you say that compiles to native code for Android, are you talking about Velvet Machine
No.
sort of thing, or is it running a Python interpreter and the Python source actually on the mobile?
It compiles to, using the Android NDK, so it compiles to C code. Well, it compiles to native code using the NDK on Android. On iOS, it's similar. So it does not run Java. It's not like compiling to Java and then you're running the Java. It compiles to the native code. Yeah.
But it sounded earlier like you said it was starting up an interpreter. So Python code actually running a Python interpreter?
Yes. So that native code is a compiled Python interpreter, and then that runs your code.
So is that C Python?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, C Python. Yeah.
I got a few questions. Is not Python then be dynamic and change on the fly in any way, or no?
Do you mean can you edit the Python on the device, or?
Well, because you're running an interpreter,
Mhm.
Which sounds like it could interpret new code on the fly.
Yep. Yeah. I think theoretically you could. I mean, we've done things like a REPL, a Kivy REPL.
So you kind of could.
Yeah. See, it's a Python interpreter. So anything you can do in Python, you can do on there. Sometimes it's tricky because you don't have the bash command prompt. You know, you don't have that command line to go with. So you have to sort of recreate the features of that you need in your app. You had another one, yeah.
Yeah, I do. The C extensions, there's recipes to get them.
Yep, Python for Android recipes, yep, for modules with C extensions.
Is the same thing there for iOS?
Yes, there must be. I am not very familiar with it, but yeah, it must be the same sort of thing. It would be in the Kivy iOS project. Kivy-iOS would have recipes for iOS. You want more?
Yeah.
All right.
You mentioned PyObject.
PyObjects.
Objects. Is that an official pronunciation? I've wondered how to pronounce
I
that.
think so. Official pronunciations can be hard because a lot of the core developers are not native English speakers, so
PyObjects.
sometimes the pronunciations are weird. Yeah, PyObjects. Do you have a question?
Yeah. Are there any tools that are used for making Windows Phone or Windows desktop apps?
No. You're welcome to contribute them. But yeah, we haven't found anyone who's actually that interested in creating those tools. Sorry. He asked about Windows Phone and Windows. No, what is it? Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
So like for like screening a barcode, is there like exist package there? Or?
A barcode screening, you would, I believe there's a native Android API for that. So you would wrap that barcode scanning API. And I happen to know one of the core developers wrote an app that did that. So basically pop on the Kivy Google group or in the IRC channel and ask, hey, where's some barcode scanning code? And we'll point you to that. Yeah, Wayne back.
How do you get access to serial or YouTube?
That would be the same way. Well, sometimes you can just use PySerial on Android and it works. Other times you have to go through the Android API. I have 0 minutes left. All right.
That wasn't the last question.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, everyone. If you have more questions, find me out in the hall. Tomorrow we're going to do an open space, which will be.
Well, there are open space. You can just go right now to the open space and continue.
I could, but I think we're going to do it tomorrow. And that will be, we're mostly going to, I think, focus on installing Kivy because sometimes that can trip people up a little bit. But any other questions will be welcome during that open space.
What time are you going to do that?
I think around 1. We're going to look at the schedule and we'll write it up there tomorrow for sure. All right, thanks.